The HOA president literally tried to rob me of my lake 3 days after I set foot on the property. What she didn't realize was that I owned the docks her entire neighborhood relied on. Picture this, I'm standing inside my late uncle's cabin, the air still heavy with the scent of funeral lilies mixed with aged pine, when a gleaming pearl-white Escalade grinds up my gravel driveway. Out steps a woman in a tennis skirt at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday, clutching a folder like it's some sacred relic. "I'm Belinda Crankshaw, HOA president," she announces, practically shoving the folder into my hands. "This lake is community property. You need to sign over the marina operations immediately." The papers looked formal, crisp, and very official. But the flicker of desperation in her eyes told me it was all a bluff. What I didn't know at that moment was that she was balancing on the edge of a financial disaster, and I was the only person who could either defuse it or blow her entire scheme sky high. So let me ask you, what would you do if someone tried to snatch your inheritance right after you buried a family member? Drop a comment with your worst HOA horror story and tell me where you're watching from. Let me rewind and explain how this whole war began. 6 months earlier, I was Marcus Trenton, 45 years old, divorced, an electrician scraping by in Detroit. My world was a cramped studio apartment that smelled like instant ramen and old regrets. My ex-wife got the house, I got stuck with the legal bills, and my future looked about as bright as a burned-out light bulb. Then, everything shifted when my great-uncle Silas passed away. Silas was the family recluse, 40 years alone on his incredible stretch of lakefront in Michigan. He rarely spoke to anyone, but he kept meticulous journals about everything he observed. His funeral was small, barely a handful of weathered neighbors who whispered stories about how he'd fought to keep vultures, both literal and figurative, away from his land. At the lawyer's office, which reeked of stale coffee and old carpet, I learned what Silas had left me. 2 acres of prime waterfront, Mr. Trenton, the lawyer said, sliding the papers across his desk. You also inherit 400 feet of shoreline on Lake Nebago, including all underwater rights and the 8-slip marina your uncle operated. I didn't know what underwater rights even meant, but I did know this: each of those boat slips was renting for $200 a month. That was $1,600 in guaranteed monthly income, just like that. The property itself was breathtaking. Towering pine trees shaded a sturdy 1960s cabin with strong bones. Crystal clear water lapped against well-built docks. The smell of fresh lake air blended with the faint trace of sawdust from Uncle Silas's old workshop. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a real shot at a new beginning. Then came Belinda Crankshaw. 3 days after the funeral, just 3 days, I was outside measuring windows for replacement when tires crunched against gravel again. That same Escalade rolled up like a storm cloud. Out she came, Belinda, this time radiating entitlement so strong it made the air feel heavy. Tennis outfit, designer shades, and a smile so fake it could cut glass. Belinda Crankshaw, HOA president, she declared again, striding up with 2 jittery board members trailing behind her like shadows. "We need to discuss your situation." The way she said "situation" made my jaw tighten. She shoved the folder at me again. Inside were papers claiming the lake access was a community easement and demanding that I sign over the marina operations to the HOA, for $1 a year. "This is how Lakeshore Estates operates," she lectured, as if I were a child. "We maintain standards, protect property values. We simply can't allow unregulated commercial activities disturbing our family community." Her voice dripped with that thinly veiled prejudice, the kind that made my skin crawl. The message was clear: people like me didn't belong here. "You've got 48 hours, she added, sliding her sunglasses up her face like a weapon. "Sign willingly, or we'll bury you in court. Ask the Hendersons what happened when they fought us." She smirked. "Oh wait, you can't. They sold and moved after we made their lives unbearable." The threat hung in the air like thick humidity. That night, surrounded by Uncle Silas's stacks of old papers and the gentle slap of water against the dock, I opened his journals. What I read made my blood boil. Page after page detailed Belinda's harassment campaigns. The Kowalski family forced out after a year and a half of frivolous lawsuits. The young Martinez couple driven away with endless violation notices and intimidation. But then, one journal entry stopped me cold. Belinda thinks she's clever, Silas had written. But she doesn't know about the 1999 county easement agreement. $12,000 annual fee required for lake access. No payments made in years. Whoever inherits this, remember, that's your nuclear option. Nuclear option? My hands trembled as I flipped the page. Another note from Silas spelled it out, the marina sat entirely on his underwater property. Every slip, every post, every chain, legally his. Let the vultures circle, he wrote. The next owner will have all the ammunition they need. I leaned back in his creaky chair, the taste of bitter coffee in my mouth. This wasn't about just property rights anymore. This was about a tyrant who had spent years bullying and cheating families out of their homes through legal warfare and intimidation. But she had picked the wrong target this time. Uncle Silas had left me more than land, he'd left me everything I needed to bring Queen Belinda's empire down. Time to hunt. Belinda didn't waste a second declaring war. She came at me with the full force of the county behind her. The morning after her 48-hour ultimatum expired, I was pouring coffee in the kitchen when I heard engines rumbling up my driveway like an invasion force. 3 vehicles rolled to a stop in front of my cabin, a county inspection truck, a sheriff's deputy cruiser, and of course Belinda's pearl-white Escalade gleaming at the rear. The air smelled of diesel exhaust mixing with the rich aroma of my fresh ground coffee as I stepped outside to watch the circus unfold. Mr. Trenton, the lead inspector said, holding a clipboard. Dave Morrison, County Inspector. We've received multiple complaints, illegal commercial activity, environmental violations, unpermitted structures. And there was Belinda, standing tall in her tennis outfit like it was body armor, practically bouncing on her heels with excitement. The deputy trailed behind, looking more bored than concerned, clearly present only to make sure I complied. I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding, Belinda called sweetly, her voice floating across the gravel. Once Mr. Trenton understands our community standards, I'm confident he'll make the appropriate arrangements. But here's the thing, I'd spent 20 years working construction. You learn to recognize intimidation tactics. And more importantly, you learn to document everything. Ma'am, Morrison said firmly, turning to Belinda. I need to conduct this inspection without interference. County policy. Her smile froze, sharp and brittle as ice forming on glass. Of course, she said, retreating back to her Escalade. And the second she was out of earshot, Dave's whole demeanor shifted. His shoulders relaxed, his tone dropped to a whisper. Your Uncle Silas was good people. Listen, this lady's been filing complaints against you for 3 weeks now. My head snapped up. 3 weeks. I only inherited the place for. Dave gave me a knowing look. Tells you everything, doesn't it? I stayed close as he conducted the inspection. Every dock post, every electrical connection, every beam, Uncle Silas had maintained everything with meticulous precision. No violations. None. I pulled out my phone and filmed the entire process, recording his notes, his observations, even the sound of his clipboard pages flipping. Meanwhile, Belinda's SUV idled in the background, her tinted windows hiding her fuming expression. When we reached the shoreline, Dave leaned in closer. I've seen this before, he muttered. Same exact pattern, constant harassment, frivolous complaints, neighbors forced to sell. And every single time, the properties were scooped up dirt cheap. He paused, his eyes locking with mine. Guess who bought them through shell companies? The pieces clicked in my head like a perfectly wired circuit. That evening, I returned to the basement and dug deeper into Silas's files. The old metal filing cabinet smelled of mothballs and age, but inside was a treasure trove of documentation, a masterclass in record keeping. The original deed from 1952, clear as day, all riparian rights extending to the lake centerline, including the lake bottom and every structure attached. Silas had even underlined the section in red ink, scrawling a note in the margin. Most people don't realize lakefront property usually includes the lake bottom unless stated otherwise. That's why it's worth more. In other words, every dock, every slip, every chain bolted into the water belonged to me by law. But the true genius wasn't just in the deed, it was in the details. Silas had documented every single interaction with the HOA for 40 years. Letters demanding payments for marina use. Threats of legal action. His responses, always polite, always pointing back to the deed, and always with copies filed away neatly. The next morning, I made my move. I called Dave Morrison directly. Dave, I need to file some complaints of my own: trespassing, illegal use of private property, unauthorized commercial operations. Commercial operations? He asked, skeptical. The HOA has been charging $200 a month for every marina slip on my lake bottom for the past 15 years. They haven't paid me a single dime in rent. By my math, that's $144,000 in unpaid fees, plus damages. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then a low whistle. Jesus Christ. You got paperwork to back that up? 40 years worth. And that's when the real allies began to emerge. Later that afternoon, Tom and Betty Henderson, neighbors I had only met briefly at the funeral, knocked on my door. Betty held a plate of chocolate chip cookies that smelled like fresh-baked victory, while Tom clutched a thick folder. We heard what Belinda's trying to do, Betty said, her eyes darting nervously as if spies might be watching. We went through the same thing. We brought you something that might help. Tom handed me the folder, his hands trembling slightly. Inside was a record of every violation notice, every legal threat, every manipulative trick Belinda had used against them before they finally sold their house. 17 separate violation notices in just 6 months, grass too long, measured down to the inch, mailbox painted the wrong color, trash bins left out for 37 minutes past pickup. The paper felt worn and creased from years of bitter handling, the Hendersons reliving the torment every time they flipped through it. Cost us $31,000 in legal fees, Tom muttered bitterly. And wouldn't you know it, her husband, Dale, suddenly found problems with our mortgage right after we pushed back. Pure coincidence, right? But it was Betty's next words that froze me in place. Marcus, 3 other families on this lake got the same treatment. The Kowalskis. The young Martinez couple. And the Patels. All of them sold, 60 to 70% below market value. Every single property bought by the same shell company. That night, sitting on the dock as moonlight shimmered across water that legally belonged to me, I made a choice. This wasn't just about defending my inheritance anymore. This was about stopping a predator who had spent years destroying families through greed and intimidation. I opened my laptop and began typing, not a surrender, but a declaration of war. By morning, Belinda would find certified letters in her mailbox, formal trespass notices for every boat docked at my marina, demands for $50,000 in back rent, and an order to vacate within 30 days. Game on, Queen Belinda. Belinda's reaction to my trespass notices was fast, brutal, and about as predictable as sunrise. Within 2 days, bright red flyers were plastered across mailboxes and pinned to neighborhood bulletin boards. She'd called an emergency HOA meeting, summoning all 47 households to the community center. In bold letters, the notice screamed, "Urgent community health hazard." According to Belinda, my marina was suddenly an environmental nightmare, a toxic threat endangering families, property values, and the lake itself. Naturally, I wasn't invited. But Tom Henderson was, and later that night he called me with the full scoop. "She's lost it," he whispered over the phone. "Claimed your dock is leaching chemicals into the water. Told everyone you're trying to turn the place into some kind of commercial fishing hub that'll flood the neighborhood with," her words, "undesirable elements." The coded language made my skin crawl, but I wasn't shocked. When cornered, People like Belinda always reveal their true colors. And that's not the half of it, Tom continued grimly. She's hired some big-shot attorney out of Grand Rapids. Guy charges $400 an hour. They're filing an injunction to shut down all your construction, citing environmental protection laws. $400 an hour. Belinda was burning through HOA dues like they were dry tinder, all in her obsession to steal my inheritance. But her real masterpiece arrived the very next morning. I was replacing a few rotted dock planks when I heard footsteps crunching up my gravel drive. I looked up to see 3 of my slip renters, the Johnsons, the Cowlskis, and an older gentleman named Frank. They looked nervous, like they'd rather be anywhere but there. Frank cleared his throat, his voice heavy. "Marcus, we got letters from the HOA yesterday. If we don't cancel our leases with you by Friday, they're threatening us with $500 daily fines. They're saying we're supporting non-compliant commercial operations." The fresh scent of wood stain on my hands mixed with the sour tang of fear radiating off these good people. Belinda was weaponizing their own neighbors against them. "She can't legally enforce that," I said firmly. Frank shook his head. "Maybe not. But she can make our lives miserable trying. The Johnsons already got a violation notice about their garden gnome being aesthetic clutter. My mailbox, after 15 years, is suddenly the wrong height. You know how this goes, death by 1,000 paper cuts. Exactly the same strategy she'd used on the Hendersons. That afternoon, I picked up the phone and called Patricia Wong, the maritime attorney Tom had recommended. She specialized in riparian property rights. Her voice was crisp, professional, and expensive. "Mr. Trenton," she said after reviewing the documents I sent, "your riparian rights are airtight. But there's something else you need to understand about who you're up against." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" "I've seen this exact pattern before. Your HOA president, Belinda Crankshaw, has acquired 4 lakefront properties in the past 8 years using this same harassment playbook. She floods homeowners with legal threats, bleeds them with court costs, then swoops in with a settlement offer, usually around 60% of market value." The pattern was becoming clear. But Patricia wasn't finished. I could hear papers rustling on her desk as she kept talking. I also cross-referenced property records with mortgage data. Belinda's husband, Dale, works for Lakeshore Bank, and that bank holds mortgages on 23 of the 47 HOA homes. That's a massive conflict of interest if he's influencing HOA policies that affect his loan portfolio. The fix had been in from the very beginning. "And one more thing," Patricia said. "Your uncle's marina records show consistent $200 monthly slip fees for 15 years. But the HOA's own financial filings claim they've been collecting $250 per month from members for maintenance." I blinked, stunned. "Wait, you mean they've been overcharging their own members $50 a month and pocketing the difference?" "Exactly. Over 15 years, that's about $36,000 in fraudulent fees siphoned straight from their neighbors." The scale of Belinda's scheme hit me like a gut punch. She wasn't just strong-arming families out of their homes, she was skimming money off the very people she claimed to represent. That evening, I made a choice that shifted the battlefield. I wasn't going to just defend myself anymore, I was going on the offensive. For 3 straight hours, I sat at my kitchen table typing out a detailed letter to every household in the HOA. I laid everything out, the fraudulent fees, the conflict of interest with Dale's bank, the pattern of harassment campaigns. And then, I hit them with the knockout punch. Effective immediately, I declared, all marina operations were suspended until the HOA paid their $144,000 debt for unauthorized use of my lake bottom. All boats must be removed within 30 days, or they'd be considered abandoned property subject to disposal. The next morning, 47 certified letters hit 47 mailboxes. By Thursday, my phone was ringing off the hook, not with outrage, but with desperation. Nearly half the neighborhood depended on my marina for their boats. Without it, they had nowhere to dock. But the best call came from Patricia Wong. Her voice carried the kind of excitement you only hear when an attorney knows they've found dynamite. "Marcus," she said. "I tracked down that 1999 county easement agreement your uncle mentioned. I've got it in hand. The HOA's access to the lake requires annual payments of $12,000 to the property owner." I was already grinning. "Let me guess, 0 payments." "Correct. They owe you $312,000 in back fees. And without that easement, the entire HOA loses lake access. 31 of their 47 homes would lose about 40% of their property value overnight." For the first time since this battle began, the balance shifted. I wasn't the one fighting for survival anymore. Belinda was. Belinda's desperation hit like a hurricane. The moment my certified letters landed, she went into overdrive, calling city council members, county commissioners, and anyone who'd listened to her twisted version of events. Her story. I was an environmental menace, a reckless outsider destroying the lake's ecosystem with illegal construction. The first strike came Tuesday morning. I was tightening new dock cleats when a truck pulled up, its side painted with bold letters, Environmental Protection Services. Out stepped a man in a city-issued vest, clipboard in one hand, attitude in the other. "Mr. Trenton," he said briskly. "Jim Bailey. Contracted by the city to investigate septic system violations. We've had reports of untreated waste entering the lake." My septic system. It had been pumped and certified just 6 months earlier by Uncle Silas himself. But I kept calm, walking Bailey through every pipe, every tank, every maintenance receipt. He snapped photos, bagged soil samples, and scribbled notes like he was solving a crime. When he finished, he leaned close, his voice dropping. "Off the record, your system's fine. But between you and me, I've had 3 separate calls this week demanding an inspection here. Same woman each time." I didn't need him to say the name. By Wednesday, the harassment escalated. I was flipping through the mail when my neighbor, Jerry Kowalski, jogged up, his face pale and worried. "Marcus," he panted, "you need to know what went down at last night's emergency board meeting. Belinda hired a private investigator. Guys from Detroit. She's paying him to dig through your background, divorce records, finances, employment history. Anything she can use to smear you as unfit to own lakefront property." The bitter taste of morning coffee turned to acid. "And the board went along with this?" Jerry nodded grimly. "Not all of them. Half the board's fed up, 2 members resigned last night. They don't want liability for her harassment campaigns. Her empire was starting to crack, but she wasn't done swinging." That afternoon, my phone buzzed with the call I'd been dreading. "Mr. Trenton. Amanda Bennett, Channel 8 News. We've received an anonymous tip about environmental violations on your property. Would you like to comment on allegations that your construction is threatening Lake Nebago's ecosystem?" Anonymous tip. Yeah, right. But instead of dodging, I saw opportunity. "Amanda," I said, "I'd be glad to talk. Not about fake violations, but about systematic HOA fraud and harassment campaigns. I've got 40 years of documentation." There was a long pause, the silence stretching until I could practically hear her curiosity spike. "Can you be specific?" I gave her the 30-second version: fraudulent marina fees, conflict of interest with the local bank, harassment campaigns driving families to sell below value. By the time I finished, she was scheduling an on-camera interview for Friday morning. Belinda, however, wasn't backing down. Thursday brought her so-called nuclear option. I was on the dock, replacing a section of railing, when the sound of engines echoed up the drive. 3 vehicles rolled in like a convoy, a county inspector's truck, a sheriff's cruiser, and, believe it or not, a man in a hazmat suit climbing out of a state environmental agency van. "Sir," hazmat guy barked, voice muffled through his respirator. "We need you to cease all construction immediately. Pending investigation of potential groundwater contamination." The smell of fresh lumber mixed with diesel fumes and bureaucratic nonsense as they marched toward me. Behind them, Belinda sat in her Escalade, windows down just enough for me to see her smug expression, directing her troops like a general at war. But this time, I was ready. I pulled out my phone and started recording, faces, badges, every word they spoke. Then I put them on speaker and called Patricia Wong. "Gentlemen," I said calmly, "you're now talking to my attorney." "Officers," Patricia's sharp voice cut through the air like a blade. "What specific contaminants are you testing for? What baseline readings do you have? And who filed the complaint that triggered this inspection?" Suddenly, the officials stopped dead. Nobody wanted to answer. Because the truth was obvious, Belinda had filed a false complaint, claiming I was dumping chemicals into the lake. Problem for her was, I'd been using eco-friendly treatments, and I had receipts for every gallon. Her case was nothing but smoke. That evening, as I reviewed the footage on my phone, there was a knock at the door. Tom Henderson stood there holding a manila folder, grinning like a man who'd just struck gold. "Betty and I did some digging," he said, laying the folder on my kitchen table. "Remember those families Belinda forced out? We tracked them down. Inside were photos, property deeds, sale records, corporate filings, all pointing to the same shell company. The name? Lakeshore Development LLC. And the managing member? Belinda Crankshaw. Her husband Dale, the banker, had approved inflated mortgages for the shell company. They'd been running an organized property theft ring for years, disguising it as community enforcement. The scope was staggering. For families harassed, property values manipulated, fraud stacked on top of fraud. This wasn't just HOA tyranny anymore. It was organized crime. That night, I sat on my dock, the moonlight scattering across the water like spilled silver coins. And it hit me, this fight wasn't about protecting my land anymore. It was about justice, for every family Belinda had crushed, every neighbor she'd intimidated, everyone who thought they had no choice but to give up. Tomorrow, I'd sit down with Channel 8 News and hand them enough dynamite to blow her entire empire apart. But tonight, I was going to enjoy the quiet before the storm. Friday morning changed everything. I was combing through Uncle Silas's papers, preparing for the TV interview, when I spotted a manila envelope wedged behind the filing cabinet. Somehow, I'd missed it during all my earlier searches. The envelope was thick, sealed, and across the front, in Silas's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "For my heir, when the vultures circle." Inside was a photocopied agreement dated November 15, 1999, between Silas Trenton and Lakeshore County. The header read, "Easement Agreement for Lakefront Development Access." My hands shook as I scanned the details. Back in '99, the county needed guaranteed lake access in order to approve the construction of Lakeshore estates. Without it, those 47 dream homes would have never been built. So they negotiated with Silas. He granted permanent lake access, on one critical condition, an annual payment of $12,000 to the property owner. $12,000, every year, for 26 years. But here was the kicker. According to the payment schedule stapled inside, the HOA had stopped making payments in 2017. They hadn't paid a dime in 8 years. With penalties and compound interest, they now owed me $147,000. And attached to the back was a handwritten note from Silas: "They stopped paying when they thought I was too old and weak to fight." Joke's on them. I kept every record. Easement lapses automatically if payments are missed for more than 12 months. Without it, they lose all lake access. My chest tightened as the numbers sank in. Without that easement, 31 of the 47 homes in Lakeshore estates would instantly lose 40% of their property value, over $2 million wiped out overnight. Now I understood why Belinda was so frantic. This wasn't about a dock or a handful of slips. This was about the very foundation of her kingdom. I sat back in Silas's creaky chair, the envelope heavy in my hands, when my phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Wong, found something important about your HOA president. Can you meet today? I called her immediately. Patricia, you're not going to believe this. I just found the 1999 easement. They owe me $147,000 in back fees. There was a stunned pause. Then Patricia swore under her breath. Jesus Christ, Marcus. That explains everything. What do you mean? I dug into property records yesterday. Belinda didn't just buy out those other lakefront homes through shell companies, she specifically targeted ones that had county easement agreements attached. Every single property she eliminated removed a potential claim against her HOA's lake access. She's been running a calculated fraud operation for years. The picture was suddenly crystal clear. Belinda wasn't just some power-hungry HOA tyrant. She was orchestrating a systematic real estate scheme designed to strip away anyone who could challenge the neighborhood's legal access to the lake. And Dale, her husband. His bank stood to lose millions if property values collapsed. This isn't just about my cabin, I said slowly. This is about their entire development. The county never would have approved it without that easement. Patricia's voice was sharp. Exactly. And now you're holding the nuclear button. I stepped out onto the dock, staring across the glassy lake where Belinda's neighbors had tied up their boats. Most of them had no idea that their president had been lying to them for years, that their lake access was a privilege bought with an agreement she'd ignored. Uncle Silas hadn't just left me land. He'd left me a weapon. And Belinda's greed had forced my hand. By evening, my kitchen table had transformed into a war room. Coffee cups, property surveys, the easement agreement spread across the surface. On my laptop, Channel 8's teaser clip for my interview was already trending. The headline flashing across the screen. HOA President's multi-million-dollar property scheme exposed. But I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. I knew the truth about predators like Belinda: when cornered, they don't give up. They get dangerous. And she was about to get very, very dangerous. The war council began in my kitchen. The air smelled like strong coffee and adrenaline. My table was buried under legal documents, property surveys, and Silas's journals, while my laptop streamed Channel 8's teaser for the interview I'd just given that morning. The headline blared, HOA President's Fraud Scheme Exposed. But there was no celebrating. I knew one thing for certain: cornered animals fight the hardest. And Belinda Crankshaw was as cornered as they came. Patricia Wong arrived first, her polished briefcase looking like it cost more than my truck. She dropped it on the table with a heavy thud. "Marcus," she said firmly, "we need to talk strategy. That easement agreement is your nuclear option. But if we play it wrong, it could backfire. Badly." Next came Tom and Betty Henderson, followed by Jerry Kowalski and 3 other neighbors I barely knew. Word was spreading fast. Reasonable people in the community were choosing sides, and they weren't siding with Belinda. "Belinda's in full panic mode," Jerry reported, setting down a box of donuts that smelled like victory. "She called another emergency board meeting tonight. Word is she's proposing a $3,000 special assessment per household to fund legal action against you." I shook my head in disbelief. $3,000? On top of the lawyer she already hired? Tom's face was grim. "She's bankrupting her own neighbors just to cover up her crimes." Patricia spread a stack of papers across the table like a general laying out battle plans. "Here's the situation. Belinda has 3 possible escape routes, and we need to block every one of them." She tapped the first document. "Route 1, attack the easement agreement. She'll hire experts to argue the county never had authority to grant lake access rights back in 1999. If she can get it thrown out, she buys time while she keeps skimming fees and harassing families." "Can she win that argument?" I asked. "Not easily," Patricia replied, "but even fighting it could drag things out for years." Betty leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "What's Route 2? "Eminent domain," Patricia said flatly. Convince the county your land is essential for community welfare. Force a sale at below market value. My jaw clenched. Can they really do that? It's a long shot, Patricia admitted. But with Dale's banking connections, it's possible. And Route 3? I asked. Patricia's expression darkened. The dirtiest one. Character assassination. Fabricated police reports, planted evidence, anything to paint you as unstable and unfit to own lakefront property. Tom slammed his fist on the table. That's exactly what she did to us. Suddenly, we were the bad neighbors who couldn't keep our yard tidy. Funny how many violations you rack up when someone's determined to ruin you. But then Patricia leaned forward, her tone sharper than ever. There's one thing Belinda doesn't know. I researched similar cases. There's a federal statute, the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act. It's a felony to use systematic harassment campaigns to manipulate property values. If we can prove her pattern, this isn't just civil court anymore. We're talking prison time. The room went silent except for the low hum of my refrigerator and the faint sound of waves outside. How do we prove it? I asked. Jerry raised his hand like a schoolkid. I've been documenting everything since the Hendersons were forced out. Photos, violation letters, meeting minutes where she openly talked about maintaining standards. I've got 3 years of records. Betty opened her purse and pulled out another manila folder. We contacted the families she drove out, the Martinez couple, the Patels, the Kowalskis. They kept records too. Violation notices, legal threats, mortgage letters. Everything. The scope of our counterattack came into focus. This wasn't just defense anymore, we had the ammo to dismantle her entire empire. Patricia outlined the plan. Phase 1, we hit her publicly with the easement payment demand, $147,000 in certified letters to every HOA household, so they all know exactly what their president's been hiding. Phase 2, Tom added, we organize the reasonable neighbors. Jerry already has 15 families willing to sign a petition demanding Belinda's resignation and a full audit. And Phase 3, Patricia continued, we go national. That Channel 8 piece was just the start. I've got contacts at the Detroit Free Press and a producer at 60 Minutes who specializes in real estate fraud cases. But the real masterstroke came from an unexpected voice. Rebecca Marsh, the elementary school teacher who lived 3 houses down, had been sitting quietly in the corner, listening. Finally, she spoke. What if we turn her own tactics against her, she suggested. Belinda uses HOA meetings to intimidate people. What if we pack the next one with supporters and demand answers about the missing easement payments? The beauty of it was obvious. Instead of a courtroom where she had lawyers and resources, we'd confront her in the very space she used to control others, with her neighbors watching every lie crumble. The annual HOA meeting's next Saturday, Jerry said, checking his phone. All 47 households get a vote on leadership and budgets. Patricia grinned like a shark that smelled blood. Perfect. By then, we'll have filed federal complaints, delivered easement demands, and armed the community with the truth. When she walks into that meeting, she won't be a president, she'll be a defendant. I looked around the table at this unlikely coalition, neighbors who'd once been strangers, now bound together by a shared fight. Tomorrow, we'd start dismantling Belinda's empire. One document at a time. But tonight, we allowed ourselves a moment to savor the thought of her downfall. Belinda's counterattack came fast, vicious, and blatantly illegal. Sunday night, I was reviewing paperwork when the low rumble of heavy machinery shook my cabin windows. I stepped outside to see a construction truck dumping a pile of busted concrete and rusted rebar right at the edge of my shoreline. Just far enough onto county right-of-way to avoid trespassing charges, but close enough that it looked like it was mine. By morning, someone had spray-painted "community property" in dripping red letters across 3 sections of my dock. The fresh chemical stench mixed with lake water until it burned my nose. I grabbed my phone and documented everything, every angle, every smear of vandalism. But Belinda's master stroke came the very next day. Tuesday afternoon, I was pressure washing the graffiti when a sheriff's cruiser rolled into my driveway. Deputy Martinez stepped out, looking uncomfortable as hell. Right behind him, like a vulture circling roadkill, Belinda's pearl-white Escalade idled on the road. "Mr. Trenton," Martinez began, shuffling his notepad, "I hate to do this. But I've got 3 separate reports filed yesterday claiming you threatened HOA board members with physical violence." My washer cut off with a wheeze. 3 reports. He glanced at his notes. Mrs. Crankshaw, board member Dale Hutchkins, and someone named Patricia Kowalski. They say you showed up at her house Saturday night making terroristic threats about what happens to people who cross you. The absurdity nearly knocked me over. "Deputy, I was at my attorney's office until 9 Saturday night. Then I went home and watched Netflix. I've got receipts and streaming history to prove it." Martinez sighed, clearly tired of the circus. "I figured as much. But I still have to file the report. Maybe think about installing cameras, for your own protection." Message received. Belinda wasn't just harassing me anymore, she was trying to build a criminal record against me out of thin air. That evening, Patricia Wong called with news that made my blood pressure spike. "Marcus," she said tightly, "I got a tip from someone at the county inspector's office. Belinda tried to bribe Jim Bailey. Offered him $2,000 cash to find violations on your property." I gripped the phone. "Please tell me he recorded it." "Better," Patricia replied. "He reported her to his supervisor and filed a formal complaint. But here's the scary part, she's tried the same thing with the septic inspector, the electrical inspector, and even someone from the fire marshal's office. She's not just desperate, she's reckless." By Wednesday, things got uglier. Tom Henderson called at 6 a.m., his voice shaking with rage. "Marcus, they broke into our mailbox last night. 3 weeks of mail gone, our social security checks, Betty's medical forms. Found it all dumped in the ditch near Belinda's house. Mail theft. A federal crime. She was spiraling into felony territory without hesitation. But Thursday morning brought the next assault. My phone rang. "Mr. Trenton. This is Sandra Willis with the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. We've received reports that your construction is disturbing protected wildlife nesting areas. We need to conduct an immediate inspection." I grabbed my binder of documentation and met her at the dock. Sandra was thorough, soil samples, photographs, drone scans. After 2 hours, she snapped her folder shut. "Mr. Trenton, your improvements are actually beneficial to the lake's ecology. Whoever filed this complaint either doesn't understand science or is deliberately wasting state resources." She packed up, then leaned closer. "Off the record? I've gotten 4 separate complaints about you in the last 2 weeks. All from the same person. And each one more hysterical than the last." Belinda wasn't slowing down, she was accelerating. That afternoon, Jerry jogged over, breathless and red-faced. "Emergency board meeting last night. Belinda proposed hiring private security to patrol community boundaries. Translation: She wants goons watching your house 24/7. I rubbed my temples. "And the board agreed?" Jerry shook his head, almost laughing. "Hardly. 3 more members resigned on the spot. They're terrified of being personally liable for lawsuits. The board's down to Belinda, Dale, and one guy who owes Dale's bank 50 grand. Her empire was collapsing from the inside out." Friday, I went on the offensive. I installed a full-blown professional security system, 8 cameras, motion sensors, cloud backup streaming directly to Patricia's office. If Belinda so much as sneezed in my direction, it'd be on video. That evening, Rebecca Marsh showed up at my door, holding a manila folder and grinning like she'd just uncovered treasure. "Marcus, you're not going to believe this. I teach Dale's daughter Emma in my 4th grade class. Yesterday, Emma told me her parents were fighting about what happens if people find out about the money we owe. She even said her mom's been making secret phone calls about selling their house and moving away. I raised an eyebrow. She said all that? Rebecca nodded. Kids hear everything. And they repeat it when adults think they won't. The rats were preparing to abandon ship. That night, I sat on the dock with the new cameras humming softly behind me. Every forged report, every bribe, every false claim, Belinda thought she was burying me under it all. But what she was really doing? Building the federal case that would bury her. Belinda's final week of freedom was a crash course in criminal desperation. Monday morning, I woke up to find my driveway blocked by a truck with Lakeshore Property Management Services stenciled on the side. 2 men in polo shirts were pacing my shoreline with clipboards, snapping photos like they owned the place. "Excuse me," I called out. "This is private property." The bigger one barely looked up. "Court order, buddy. HOA hired us to assess community assets for potential receivership." "Court order, my ass," I muttered. I checked later, no such filing existed. But what they didn't know was that I had every second recorded on my security system, saved straight to Patricia's office. By Tuesday, Belinda had graduated from harassment to outright forgery. Patricia called me mid-morning, her voice tight with fury. "Marcus," she filed a marina lease renewal with the county clerk. "Claims you sign a 99-year agreement transferring all lake rights to the HOA for $1 annually." The audacity almost made me laugh. Did the county accept it? They stamped it, until I had a handwriting expert review your supposed signature. It's a pathetic forgery. She didn't even get the capital letters right. Forgery of a legal document. Federal felony. 5 years minimum. Wednesday delivered the bribery attempt. A county judge's campaign account suddenly received a mysterious $5,000 donation from concerned Lakeshore citizens. That same day, Belinda filed motions challenging the easement. Problem was, the donation check was signed by Dale Crankshaw himself, and the money came directly from the HOA's community fund. That was campaign finance fraud, embezzlement, and attempted judicial bribery all rolled into one. She was collecting felonies like trophies. Thursday morning, the spectacle turned comical. I was sipping coffee when Patricia called, barely holding back laughter. "Marcus, you need to see this." Belinda staged an environmental protest outside the county office. Hired 15 people from a temp agency, gave them signs saying you're poisoning the lake. Did it work? I asked. Oh, it worked all right, just not how she wanted. Channel 8 interviewed the protesters. Half admitted on camera they were paid $50 and didn't even know what they were protesting. The others couldn't pronounce environmental. It's blowing up online already. Her desperation was starting to look like parody. But Friday brought news that made my stomach sink. Rebecca Marsh called at dawn, her teacher's voice sharp with worry. "Marcus, Emma Crankshaw didn't come to school yesterday." I called her house. Belinda told me they went to visit grandparents. But Emma's grandmother lives 2 streets over, and she hasn't seen them. Within an hour, Tom Henderson confirmed what we feared. "Saw them at 5 this morning," he said. "Loading suitcases into Dale's car. Big ones. They're running." The Crankshaws were preparing to vanish before the walls closed in. That afternoon, I got the call that changed everything. "Mr. Trenton, this is Special Agent Lisa Bennett, FBI Financial Crimes Division. We've been monitoring your neighborhood situation for weeks. Your attorney provided us with extensive documentation. We're ready to move forward." I gripped the phone. Move forward how? Arrests. Search warrants. Asset seizures. Mrs. Crankshaw has been running a racketeering scheme that crosses state lines. We've identified nearly identical operations in Ohio and Indiana. This isn't just a local HOA dispute anymore, it's organized real estate fraud on a multi-state scale. The scope floored me. Belinda hadn't just been stealing from our lake, she'd been running a criminal empire. Agent Bennett continued. We need you at Saturday's HOA meeting. Let her think she's still in control while we execute warrants. Can you handle that? I looked out across the lake, the evening sun bleeding gold over the water. After months of threats, intimidation, and sabotage, the tide was finally turning. Yes, I said firmly. I'll be there. Saturday dawned gray and misty, the smell of rain hanging heavy over Lake Nebago. The community center parking lot was jammed, 47 households packed inside, media vans lined along the road, and half the sheriff's department sitting in unmarked cars. Inside, Belinda sat at the head table like a queen clinging to her throne. She wore a navy blazer instead of her usual tennis outfit, her fake smile stretched so tight it looked painful. Dale sat beside her, hunched and twitchy, checking his phone every few seconds like he knew bad news was coming. The meeting started like every other HOA meeting, tedious budget reports, landscaping proposals, mind-numbing policy talk. But the tension in the room was electric, like pressure building in a boiler. Then Rebecca Marsh stood up. Her teacher's voice rang out clear as a bell. I'd like to ask about the $147,000 in unpaid easement fees the HOA owes Mr. Trenton for lake access. The room froze. Belinda's smile flickered like a dying light bulb. I'm not sure what you're referring to, she said carefully, her voice sugar-coated with denial. Tom Henderson rose next, his weathered face hard as stone. We're talking about the 1999 agreement requiring annual payments of $12,000. Payments this HOA hasn't made since 2017. One by one, neighbors stood, Jerry Kowalski, Betty Henderson, half a dozen more. Voices rose, demanding answers. Belinda's mask cracked. She lashed out. This is a coordinated attack by agitators trying to destroy our property values. That's when the back doors opened, and Special Agent Lisa Bennett walked in, her FBI badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. 3 agents followed, with sheriff's deputies quietly sealing every exit. Mrs. Belinda Crankshaw, Agent Bennett said, her voice calm but carrying like thunder, you're under arrest for racketeering, mail fraud, wire fraud, document forgery, bribery of public officials, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. The click of handcuffs was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. The community center erupted in gasps and shouts as Belinda went pale, shrieking. This is a setup. He's the criminal. He's trying to steal our lake. Dale tried to slip out the side door, but Deputy Martinez was waiting. Dale Crankshaw, you're under arrest for bank fraud, conspiracy, and violations of federal real estate law. Channel 8's cameras captured every second live, Belinda fighting the cuffs, Dale's face crumpling in defeat, neighbors watching in stunned silence. I stood slowly, the manila folder Silas had left me tucked under my arm. My voice carried over the chaos. Actually, Belinda, let's talk about who's been stealing what. I walked to the front, unfolded the easement agreement, and held it high. This document, signed by the county and my uncle, requires $12,000 in payments every year for lake access. Without it, 31 of your homes lose their rights to this lake entirely. And you haven't paid in 8 years. Gasps rippled through the room. Jerry asked the question everyone was thinking. How much do we owe? $147,000, I said. Plus compound interest. But that's not the worst of it. I opened another folder. Your president has been defrauding you directly, charging $250 per month for marina maintenance while paying my uncle only $200. That's $50 per family, per month, siphoned for 15 years. Roughly $36,000 stolen from your own pockets. The room erupted. Shouts of anger, neighbors turning on each other, voices rising. She stole from us. Where's our money? All those fees, gone. Belinda screamed, thrashing in her cuffs. You don't understand. He doesn't belong here. We were protecting the community. Protecting it from what? Rebecca snapped back, her voice cutting like a whip. From someone who actually owns his property legally. Tom Henderson stepped forward, voice trembling with fury. You ruined us, Belinda. 17 violation notices in 6 months. 31,000 in legal bills. You drove us out of our home. Betty added her voice, recounting every petty humiliation. Jerry listed intimidation tactics. Other neighbors admitted they'd nearly sold just to escape the harassment. Agent Bennett held up evidence bags. Mrs. Crankshaw bribed inspectors, forged property records, organized mail theft, filed false police reports. We have recordings, photographs, and testimony. This is organized criminal activity spanning multiple states. Reporters' cameras flashed. Phones live-streamed. Social media hashtags were already exploding. And then came my turn. I faced the crowd, steady and calm. Despite everything your president has done, I'm willing to settle. I'll forgive the $147,000 in back easement fees if the community agrees to a $50,000 payment plan over 5 years. That money will fund marina repairs and lake restoration. From here on, the marina will be resident managed, with fair, transparent fees. For the first time that day, the room exhaled in relief. Applause broke out, scattered at first, then swelling until the building shook. Belinda turned back one last time, her voice ragged with rage. This isn't over. My lawyers will destroy you. Agent Bennett's reply was the perfect mic drop. Ma'am, you're facing 37 federal charges. Your lawyers are going to be very busy. The community center doors slammed shut behind Belinda and Dale as they were led out in cuffs. Justice, at last. The fallout was immediate and relentless. By Monday morning, Channel 8's footage had gone national. Clips of Belinda screaming in cuffs aired on every network. CNN ran a headline calling her the Queen of HOA fraud. Fox labeled it the Great Lakeshore Scam. Even late-night comedians got in on it, cracking jokes about Karens with handcuffs instead of clipboards. Within 48 hours, the FBI froze the Crankshaws' assets. Their Escalade was repossessed right out of the driveway. Their McMansion sat dark and empty, a foreclosure notice taped to the front door. The HOA, once her personal kingdom, collapsed like wet cardboard. 3 more board members resigned in disgrace, leaving the group leaderless. County officials appointed an interim receiver, a retired accountant named Mary Holt, who immediately slashed dues in half and canceled every bogus, special assessment. For the first time in years, the neighborhood breathed freely. But while Belinda's empire crumbled, I wasn't done. With Patricia's help, I filed a civil suit against the HOA for unpaid easement fees. It wasn't about the money anymore, it was about putting a permanent legal stamp on the truth. The county judge fast-tracked the case, given the FBI investigation. His ruling was blunt and devastating. Failure to pay annual easement fees renders the HOA's right to lake access null and void. Effective immediately. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as the order was read. 31 households lost lake rights on paper in a single stroke. Property values plunged overnight. But I stood, raised my hand, and said clearly, Your Honor, I waive enforcement of that order under one condition, that the HOA signs a new, transparent lease, with payments directly funding lake preservation and community use. The judge smiled faintly. Mr. Trenton, I wish more landowners handled disputes with such grace. By Thursday, the new lease was signed. Families who once saw me as an outsider now stopped by with casseroles, cold beers, and tearful thanks. One man hugged me so hard I nearly dropped the dock cleat I'd been tightening. Marcus, he said, voice breaking, you saved our homes. She had us believing we were powerless. The victory wasn't just mine, it belonged to every family Belinda had bullied, fined, and threatened. But the sweetest moment came 2 weeks later, when I received a letter forwarded from the federal prison intake facility. It was from Belinda. The handwriting was jagged, desperate. She begged for forgiveness, claiming she'd only wanted to protect the community, and that Dale had pressured her into everything. She asked me to testify on her behalf at sentencing. I folded the letter once, slid it back into the envelope, and tossed it into the fire. The flames curled the paper into blackened ash, carrying her lies up the chimney and out of my life. Justice had already spoken. That night, I walked down to the dock. The lake was calm, moonlight spreading silver across its surface, the same way it had the first day I arrived with Silas's keys in hand. For the first time since inheriting the cabin, I felt at peace. Uncle Silas had fought this battle for years, keeping records, waiting for someone strong enough to finish the fight. I realized then, it was never really about docks, or easements, or even property lines. It was about dignity. About standing your ground when someone tries to strip away what's yours. About refusing to bow to tyranny, no matter how small or petty it seems. The lake lapped quietly against the shore, a steady heartbeat in the night. And as I stood there, breathing in the cool air, I whispered a promise to the water and to Silas's memory. They'll never take this place again. Months passed, and the ripples of Belinda's downfall spread far beyond Lake Nebago. The FBI investigation uncovered sister operations in Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. Belinda had been consulting with other HOA presidents, teaching them how to enforce standards, while quietly funneling properties through shell companies. The web of fraud unraveled one community at a time. Her sentencing made headlines nationwide. In federal court, she stood pale and defiant until the very end, claiming she was the victim of a conspiracy. The judge wasn't buying it. "Mrs. Crankshaw," he said coldly, "you abused your neighbors, your position, and the law. You treated families like pawns in a real estate scam. The court sentences you to 18 years in federal prison." Dale wasn't spared either. Bank fraud and conspiracy earned him 12 years. The once proud Crankshaw family name became a cautionary tale, whispered with embarrassment instead of respect. Back at the lake, life took on a quieter rhythm. The HOA rebuilt under new leadership, Mary Holt as president, Rebecca Marsh as secretary, Tom Henderson as treasurer. They opened the books for the first time in decades, slashing unnecessary expenses and putting money toward real improvements. For the first time in years, neighbors laughed together at the marina. Kids fished off the dock. Families grilled burgers on weekends without fearing violation notices taped to their doors. One afternoon, Jerry Kowalski stopped by with a cooler of beer. He handed me one, settled into a chair on my dock, and sighed. "Feels different now, doesn't it?" I nodded, watching the sun scatter diamonds across the water. "It finally feels like home." Not long after, Channel 8 aired a follow-up special, From Tyranny to Triumph, How a Lake Community Took Back Its Freedom. They interviewed neighbors, filmed kids splashing in the water, even shot a segment of me standing on the dock Silas had built decades earlier. The story resonated far beyond Michigan. Letters poured in from across the country, families trapped under oppressive HOAs, people bullied by petty tyrants, veterans who saw themselves in the fight for dignity. Some asked for advice. Others just wanted to say thank you. I answered every letter. Because I understood now, this wasn't just my battle. It was a story as old as time, people standing up to corruption, saying enough is enough. On the anniversary of Silas's passing, I sat alone at the water's edge. The air was crisp, the lake glassy, the silence deep. I pulled his old pipe from the drawer where I kept it, unlit but heavy in my hand, and whispered into the stillness. "Uncle, I kept it safe. They'll never take it again." The wind shifted, carrying the smell of pine and fresh water across the dock. Somewhere in the distance, a loon called, its echo haunting and beautiful. And in that moment, I knew the fight was finished. The lake was free. The neighbors were free. And so was I.